Within the confines of Naruto, there are a lot of weapons that could be considered mythical. The Sword of Totsuka, the Yadamira, the Seven Swords of the Mist, the treasured tools of the Sage of Six Paths. The list goes on and on and on. But out of all of these weapons, which is truly the strongest? And for that matter, what do half of these weapons even really do? So I figured I would take this opportunity to cover every weapon that's considered mythically powerful in Naruto, from the weakest to the strongest, and explain each one along the way. But before we get to explaining or ranking anything, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. And while you're at it, guys, please follow my other two YouTube pages, NCGamer23, where instead of talking anime, I play video games, and Hammer's Collection, where instead of talking anime, I unbox things from it. But before we get into all that, guys, today we have a recurring sponsor to the page, BetterHelp. BetterHelp is one of my favorite sponsors because I vehemently stand on the take that mental health is just that, health. See, BetterHelp is a product that I use a lot. The life of a content creator is filled with highs and lows, and having to teach myself that my worth is not dependent on the amount of views I get is something that I did with the help of BetterHelp. But what is BetterHelp, really? BetterHelp is an online mental health service with licensed therapists who are trained to listen to and help you. You can talk to your therapist in an online private situation at your own convenience. And on top of that, BetterHelp's broad network of therapists, over 20,000 strong, can help you with any problem you might have. Every single one of those 20,000 therapists has a different range of expertise. Therefore, you can find the one perfectly suited to you. All you have to do is fill out a questionnaire to help assess what you might need, and within 48 hours, you are matched to a therapist. Then you and your therapist can set times to schedule either video or phone sessions. And on top of this, you can send your therapist unlimited messages, and everything you share is confidential. My therapist helped me realize that a lot of people out there enjoy my content for me, and therefore I shouldn't be afraid to explore as many anime as I please. So let's say the therapist you're matched with doesn't suit your fancy. You can request a new therapist at any time for no charge. So join the 3 million people, one of which is me, on their path to better their mental health with a licensed therapist from BetterHelp. Get 10% off your first month of BetterHelp at betterhelp.com/nchammer, or click the link in my description. We all have struggles, and it's about time we worked on them. So before we dive into this video, I feel as though I should explain what I define as mythical. Obviously, there's a lot of weapons within the confines of Naruto that you just wouldn't see in the real world. But are Asuma's knuckle knives considered mythical because he can channel his chakra into them and increase the range of them? I'm gonna go with no. For me, a mythical weapon within the confines of Naruto is going to be canon A. There is a ton of non-canon and filler mythical weapons. Basically, every single filler arc or video game had some mythical weapon that they were chasing after. So we're gonna leave those out. But B, these have to be weapons of lore, not mass-produced things. True ones of one. The kind of weapon that's passed down through generations, not simply just remade elsewhere. And what's truly wild about Naruto is that this doesn't even necessarily slim down our numbers. We're still looking at 20 or so entries on this list. And since we got a long video ahead of us, well, we might as well get started. Our first and therefore weakest entry on this list brings me a lot of pleasure, because it's Sasuke's Kusanagi sword. You see, a sword of Kusanagi is supposed to be a mythical blade with insane abilities. I mean, it's based off a magical sword from Japanese Shinto lore. It's meant to be able to extend and retract, cut through anything, and be controlled telekinetically. How many of those things can Sasuke's sword of Kusanagi do? 0. I mean, yes, he can apply lightning release to it and make it super sharp. He can even apply his Chidori to it to extend its blade. And with this lightning release applied to it, he was able to cut through the Executioner's sword. But mind you, today we're talking about the weapons in Naruto, not the chakra releases applied to them. For all intents and purposes, there's really no reason for us to believe that Sasuke couldn't do this with any sword. And the fact that his sword of Kusanagi doesn't have any of the abilities of Orochimaru's leads us to believe that either he didn't get a real sword of Kusanagi or he doesn't know how to use it. Regardless, when all things are said and done, this is basically just the katana in Sasuke's hands. A katana that can get longer, basically cut through anything with the power of lightning release, but that's just lightning release. However, it's easier to believe that this sword of Kusanagi isn't really that special, considering the fact that after Sasuke's fight with Madara, it's discarded, and he later replaced this sword of Kusanagi with another one down the line. So either they're not hard to find, or he's not getting the real ones. Up next, after our favorite character in all of Naruto, we have an entry that some people may find a bit contentious. This next entry is kind of stretching the description of what a weapon is, but it's my page, so I'll do what I want. Our next entry on the list are Chakra Rods. You know, the black rods that Nagato decided to nail Jiraiya to the floor with? Yeah, those chakra rods. Also known as black receivers, these chakra rods are much more than just spikes. Essentially, black receivers or chakra rods can work as an antennae for the user of these black rods. What do I mean by that? Well, of course, the only people who can use these chakra rods are wielders of the Rinnegan. And wielders of the Rinnegan can generate these chakra rods from their own body. And considering the fact that these chakra rods are as hard as steel, it's basically like having Shinkatsu Myaku, Kimimaru's Kekkei that allowed him to grow bones out of his body. Because these black rods can be grown out of your arms or your legs to stop incoming blows. But I know what you're saying,
Well, Nick, if these black rods are just steel rods, that's not that powerful.
but like I said, these black rods can work as an antennae for the caster or the user of the Rinnegan. Essentially, if one of these black rods is put in a corpse, like Nagato does with the 6 Paths of Pain, he can transmit his chakra to those corpses in order to control them. Now, this technique works best when he's close to those bodies and at a high elevation, a bit like an antennae. However, he doesn't necessarily have to be close. Nagato can pilot the 6 Paths of Pain from dozens of kilometers away, and this is mostly due to the fact that he has an almost limitless amount of chakra, but any dual wielder of the Rinnegan kind of needs to have that. But let's say you don't have any corpses that you're trying to control right now. That's fine, you can use these chakra rods in a different kind of way. If you get one of these chakra rods into an opponent of yours, you can send your chakra into their chakra network. And since the basis of jutsu is molding chakra into a jutsu, like a ninjutsu or a genjutsu, if somebody else's chakra is inside of you disrupting your chakra network, it's almost impossible to mold those jutsus. So as the fight continues, if the Rinnegan wielder is able to get more and more of these black receivers into you, you will be able to fight back less and less. And this is actually what killed Jiraiya in the end. Now, the only downside to these receivers is that the chakra sent to them from that far away, high up place can be tracked back to the caster's original location. Because of that, people sending chakra to these receivers have to change the frequency at which their chakra is being sent. If you know anything about wave frequencies, you'll understand that there's different lengths of frequencies. But for those of you who don't understand anything about wave frequencies, let's just say you send your chakra like this. If you consistently send your chakra like this to those black receiver rods, you can be tracked. However, if every 5 minutes you go from this to this, you can't be tracked as easily. And if that doesn't sound broken enough to you, well, these chakra rods can also change shape. They can take the form of a chain or a trident or something like that. The user of the Rinnegan can apply shape transformation to these chakra rods to make them any shape that they need, because these chakra rods are just, well, they're chakra. However, if the wielder of these chakra rods is injured or killed, these chakra rods disintegrate, and that's their biggest weakness, which is why they're under our next entry on the list, the Executioner Sword. You see, the Executioner Sword is actually my favorite weapon in all of Naruto, point blank period. But I fully understand that it is very weak. Well, that's not exactly the correct terminology. It's not very weak, because anybody who's able to wield a 6.5-foot slab of steel is going to be able to swing that bad boy around in such a way that it's probably not going to tickle when it hits you. And that's where the true strength of the Executioner Sword comes in. As a weapon itself, it's not that strong, until you consider the fact that in order to wield this weapon, you have to be able to swing this weapon, and when you consider the momentum behind a 6.5-foot slab of steel coming at you, well, it's pretty scary. However, when it comes down to it, it is simply just a broadsword with the ability to regenerate itself using the iron from blood, which is a dumb ability because how often is a 6.5-foot steel sword breaking? But after being wielded by the likes of Zabuza, Kakashi, Suigetsu, Mangetsu, we've seen that the Executioner Blade in the right hands is a very powerful tool, just not nearly as powerful as anything else on this list. Moving on! Our next entry in the list also stretches what we can consider as a weapon within the Naruto universe, because just like with the Chakra Rods, this is also a Rinnegan ability. Specifically, this Rinnegan ability is Shirato, also known as the Asura Path. See, the reason that the Asura Path and no other paths are being considered on this list is because the Asura Path allows the Path of Pain or the Rinnegan user to mechanize their own body. The Rinnegan user can use this ability to make their arm a rocket launcher, give themselves a serrated bladed tail. They can even make holes in their arms that can shoot bullets, basically. On top of that, they can make holes in their feet to emit chakra from to basically fly. The sheer versatility that's given to you with the Asura Path in terms of mechanized weapon abilities puts it on this list. There is no other weapon on this list that gives you such a broad range of abilities, though we can't technically whittle it down to one one true weapon. And while obviously in Boruto things like chain guns and kunai rocket launchers exist, in Naruto those things didn't exist. So being able to shoot rockets or bullets or fly or make a serrated blade arm or a drill arm, all of these things were incredibly powerful, especially when you consider the fact that the Asura Path was physically strong enough to just straight up rip Jiraiya's arm off him. That's our last contentious entry, by the way. The rest are definitely weapons. Like our next entry on the list, the Kabutawari. You see, on this list, obviously, we're going to talk about the 7 Swords of the Mist. And while the 7 Swords of the Mist have a lot of prestige in lore around them, some of the swords are just, well, swords. And some of the swords are just, well, not swords and also not that useful. And that's what the Kabutawari is. The Kabutawari, also known as the Helmet Splitter, is basically just a hammer and an axe. And they're connected, and that's literally it. The way that the weapon is supposed to be used is in conjunction, obviously. They're attached at the hilts. But the way that it's supposed to be used in conjunction is that the user is supposed to swing the axe down onto the armor of their opponent and then bring the hammer down on the back of the axe. By applying this additional leverage to the back of the axe, there's supposed to be an armor-piercing effect. This is why it's referred to as the Helmet Splitter. But there's nothing mythical about this weapon at all. It is just a hammer and an axe connected at the hilts. But for the sheer fact that it can cut through basically everything using the hammer and axe tactic, it's stronger than a couple of other things on this list. Most namely the Executioner Blade, which cannot cut through everything. Couldn't even make it all the way through Juzo. But since we're talking about weapons with strings attached to the hilt, the next entry on our list is the Nubari. The Nubari is a needle, though it's technically referred to as a narrow longsword. And the Nubari is used as a piercing weapon. Essentially, the wielder of the Nubari uses this needle to pierce through their enemies. The true trick of the Nubari is the thread that's attached to its hilt, or I guess its eye, because it's the eye of the needle. See, there is a seemingly endless amount of steel thread attached to the Nubari's hilt. And using that seemingly endless amount of thread, the wielder of the Nubari is able to pierce their opponent and tie them to things. Let's say I stab you through the shoulder. I can then stab the Nubari through a tree or a rock, and then you will be tied to said tree or rock. But the way that this thread is most often used is to stitch people up. Essentially, the wielder of the Nubari has to be somebody incredibly fast, somebody who can poke a bunch of holes in you and then use those holes in the thread through those holes to stitch you up so you can no longer fight back. The way that the Nubari is often used, though, is to stitch opponents to each other, to either make a mass grave or to make your two opponents hinder each other as they try to fight back. And in the anime, we've even seen the thread of the Nubari able to shut down chakra flow, meaning that once you're stabbed by the Nubari and the thread is going through your body, chakra won't be able to flow through that spot. And since chakra needs to be flowed through the entire body to be molded correctly, this shuts down somebody's ability to use jutsus. But since we're talking about flowing chakra through weapons, the next entry on the list is the Kiba Blades. You see, the Kiba Blades are the first entry from the 7 Swords of the Mist that feels like an actual mystical blade. You see, the Kiba Blades are referred to as the sharpest weapons ever made. I put that in quotations because more likely than not, it's just not true. You see, the Kiba Blades have been imbued with lightning chakra. That is to say, it's kind of like Sasuke's Kusanagi sword, except you don't have to put your own chakra into them. You see, the cut ability and the extending power that Sasuke achieves by funneling his lightning chakra into a sword of Kusanagi is basically what you get just by picking up the Kiba Blades. Except the Kiba Blades don't necessarily show the lightning release that they've been imbued with. Essentially, the lightning release that's been imbued to them keeps the swords ringing at a high frequency, which allows you to cut through basically anything. However, you can also imbue your own lightning chakra into the Kiba Blades to increase their power. But you don't just increase the sharpness of the blades by imbuing your lightning into them. By funneling your lightning releases through the Kiba Blades, you actually increase the power of your own lightning release. That is to say, if I was to fire a lightning ball at you without the use of the Kiba Blades, it would be weaker than if I had the Kiba Blades and I funneled my lightning release through the Kiba Blades and threw the lightning ball at you using them. And on top of that, it uses substantially less chakra if you imbue your lightning release into the Kiba Blades and use the lightning ball in that way. So not only are you increasing the power of your lightning release, you're also reducing how much chakra it takes. And I know what you're saying. You're saying,
Nick, well, those blades sound incredibly powerful. How are they this low down the list?
Well, the rest of the things on the list kind of defy explanation, like the Shibuki, which is a stretch to call it a sword, but it is one of the 7 Swords of the Mist. You see, the Shibuki is also known as the Blast Sword, and it is essentially a broadsword that makes a limitless amount of explosive seals. Do we know how it makes a limitless amount of explosive seals? Nope. But essentially, this broadsword is a revolving series of explosive seals that can make an almost endless amount of explosions. Now, obviously, the sword is also a danger to the user because it is a massive amount of explosions at a literal arm's length. But the sword also basically gives you access to mutually multiplying explosive tags, a jutsu created by Tobirama that requires you know Edo Tensei and make those Edo Tensei corpses out of explosive seals. But when it comes to raw power or precision in Naruto, usually precision is the stronger of the two, which is why the Hiramekirai is considered stronger than the Shibuki in the Seven Swordsmen of the Mist. The Hiramekirai, or the split sword, is used by Chojuro. Now this sword is incredibly powerful, but only in the correct hands, because amongst the Seven Swords of the Mist, it is the second hardest to use. You see, the split sword to most may just seem like a sword that you can split into two, and therefore is just a weirdly shaped dual-wielding sword. However, what's incredible about the split sword is that chakra can be funneled into it. And just like with Asuma's knuckle blades, that can increase the range of the sword, in that it can extend it. However, unlike with Asuma's blades, the split sword can change shape. With the chakra funneled into the split sword, it can be a sword, or an axe, or a hammer, or a whip. Essentially, change transformation can be applied to the chakra, applied to the split swords to fit any goal, which makes the split sword one of the most versatile weapons in the entirety of Naruto. Let's say you're fighting a big and or heavily armored opponent. You can change the split sword into a hammer in order to break them down. Let's say you're fighting somebody with incredibly high mobility. You can make the split sword a whip that's able to follow them around and cut them down. Essentially, the split sword with the right user can take the shape of any of the Seven Swords of the Mist, except for one. But we're not going to talk about that one quite yet, because before we talk about that seventh sword of the Seven Swords of the Mist, we have to talk about a different weapon, the Goonbay Uchiwa. You see, the Goonbay is a weapon used primarily by the Uchihas, carved from a spirit tree, only used for making spiritual weapons. And this Goonbay has been passed down through Uchiha clansmen for generations. But what is this Goonbay that Madara became famous for his use of? Well, it's a non-folding wooden fan. But why would you need a fan on the battlefield? Well, the Goonbay is able to reflect all ninjutsu. Essentially, any ninjutsu launched at the wielder of the Goonbay can be reflected back as wind nature. But how does that work? Let's say hypothetically you launch a fireball at Madara. If Madara hits this fireball with the Goonbay, it converts the fireball to wind nature. So any chakra release fired at this Goonbay gets converted to wind nature, which can then be sent back at their opponent. And from what we've seen, there's basically no limit to this. Obito used the Goonbay to reflect a super mini-tailed beast bomb from Naruto, and there was little to no damage seen to the Goonbay. Because it converts any chakra nature to wind and sends it back in the direction it was sent, it can also be used as a shield. It's essentially the perfect defense, but not actually the perfect defense, because we'll talk about the perfect defense later on in this video. But enough about defense, let's talk about offense, and specifically how this next entry might offend some people. You see, when I was making this video, I was pondering as to whether or not I should include puppets, because puppets are weapons. And while most puppets aren't passed down through the generations, some are, and some puppets have reached mythical status. The first puppet that came to mind when I thought about puppets that have reached mythical status was the third Kage puppet. This puppet was created by Sasori after he assassinated the third Kage and converted his body into that of a puppet. But what makes this puppet truly unique is the fact that Sasori was able to bring the third Kage's Kekkei Genkai from his dead body to the puppet. Essentially, Sasori was the first ever person to be able to impart a Kekkei Genkai into a puppet, and that Kekkei Genkai was magnet release, specifically the ability to control iron sand. And thus Sasori, by being able to convert this Kekkei Genkai into a puppet, essentially acquired the Kekkei Genkai himself, because through this puppet he would be able to control iron sand. And being able to control iron sand basically gives him all the abilities of Gaara, but stronger, because iron is significantly more dense than sand. Using this ability, Sasori is able to make impenetrable iron walls, iron bullets that fly at you at high velocity. He's able to create giant hands out of iron that can grab you from under. All of the things that the third Kage or any magnet release user would be able to use. And considering the fact that the third Kage puppet was then passed to Kankuro after Sasori's death, I consider this a weapon that's been passed through the generations. But since we're talking about puppets that have been passed through the generations, there is another set of puppets that has almost definitely been passed through the generations and is much more powerful than the third Kage. You see, these puppets are the white secret technique, the 10 Chikamatsu puppets. This collection of 10 puppets was passed down from Monzaimon Chikamatsu to Granny Chiyo. You see, Monzaimon Chikamatsu within the Naruto universe was the creator of puppets. Well, he was the first person to make them combat ready. And over his life, he made hundreds of puppets, but his true masterpiece was these 10 puppets. You see, Monzaimon Chikamatsu's collection of 10 puppets were built in order to work together. And while they were 10 puppets, they were meant to operate as one. You see, these 10 puppets were actually what acquired Granny Chiyo her fame during the Second and Third Great Shinobi World Wars. Sasori states that these 10 puppets were once used to take down an entire castle of ninja by themselves. I mean, obviously Granny Chiyo was controlling them, but still, with just those puppets. These 10 puppets show terrifying prowess in both taijutsu and ninjutsu, and they don't actually always have to be be 10 puppets. Like I said, these puppets can combine, and once they combined, their abilities change. Like when 3 puppets combine in order to pull off the 3 jewels suction crushing technique, where puppets 6, 7, and 8 combined into a triangle that creates a terrifying tornado of wind that sucks everything in front of them into it and crushes them once they go through the triangle. The versatility of these puppets and the fact that they've been passed down for so many generations and that Granny Chiu used these puppets to fight the likes of Sakamo Hatake and Hanzo the Salamander implies that these weapons must be mythical indeed, but not nearly as mythical as our next entry on the list. You see, we've talked about Sasuke's Sword of Kusanagi, but we haven't talked about Orochimaru's. See, Orochimaru's Sword of Kusanagi lives up to all of the hype that a Sword of Kusanagi should. This is a weapon of lore. Not only is Orochimaru's Sword of Kusanagi stored within himself, and whenever he needs it, he regurgitates a snake that regurgitates the sword and he pulls it out of himself. But on top of that, this sword can extend and detract at will, allowing it to strike like a snake and then recoil back to Orochimaru. The versatility of that alone is terrifying. But in true Sword of Kusanagi fashion, in aligning with Japanese Shinto lore about the Sword of Kusanagi, it is able to cut through anything. We are told that it's able to cut through anything by Monkey King Enma, who is able to make himself into an adamantite pole. The reason that it's important within that context is the fact that adamantite is the hardest substance in all of Naruto. It's like the vibranium of the Naruto world. And Monkey King Enma states that if he's struck by the Sword of Kusanagi while in this adamantite pole formation, he can be cut. Mind you, adamantite chains are what was used by the Uzumakis to seal tail beasts. And the Sword of Kusanagi that Orochimaru wields can cut through that. But if the fact that the sword can extend and detract and also cut through anything isn't scary enough, well, Orochimaru can also control it telekinetically. Yeah, that's right. Just like Alucard in Castlevania, Orochimaru can control his sword without even touching it. And this is how he was able to stab Hiruzen. Simply by swishing and flicking his fingers like somebody saying Leviosa, he can fly a sword through the air that can cut through anything. Just swish and flick the shit out of your wand. Am I the only person who's seen that video? Moving on. The only things that we've seen the Sword of Kusanagi not able to pierce through was Naruto's four-tail cloak. However, let's say Orochimaru's sword finds something it can't pierce, it can turn into a snake and return back to him discreetly. The Sword of Kusanagi is actually based off the 3 imperial regalia of Japan. The 3 imperial regalia of Japan are 3 items passed down from emperor to emperor. And those items include the Sword of Kusanagi, the Yadamira, and the Yasaka bead. And we're going to talk about those 2 other imperial regalia, but later down the list. First, we have to talk about Samehada. Yeah, you thought I forgot about the last and strongest sword in the 7 Swords of the Mist. And while you could say that Orochimaru's Sword of Kusanagi gives Samehada a run for its money, I have to give Samehada the edge here. Samehada is a living, breathing, sentient sword, specifically a shark skin sword. So while not sharp should you be hit with it in a traditional slashing sense, it is still an incredibly dangerous sword, because outside of the fact that it is the same size as the Executioner blade, so if you get hit by it, blunt force is a thing. If the wielder of Samehada then pulls the sword back, the shark skin will rip your skin to ribbons. And once you're ripped to ribbons, that's kind of where your problems begin. Because mind you, this is a sentient living sword. A sentient living sword that lives off the chakra of its wielder. But now from any wound, either caused by Samehada or the wielder of Samehada will begin to leak chakra. And that chakra will be leaked directly to Samehada. And the more of your chakra that Samehada gets to eat, the stronger, faster, and bigger it gets. And obviously, the more chakra you leak, the less chakra you have. So essentially, you have to fight Samehada without ever being hit by Samehada or the wielder of Samehada. And if you do get hit by them, you better hope they don't open your skin, because the wielder of Samehada doesn't have to worry about Samehada getting bigger, because once again, Samehada is a sentient living blade, meaning that it doesn't matter how big Samehada gets, the weight doesn't necessarily increase for the wielder. More or less, Samehada is just guided by the wielder to attack in certain ways. So it's like fighting a bigger and faster shark as you get slower. Let's say somehow you manage to push the wielder of Samehada into a corner. The wielder of Samehada can fuse with Samehada and make a shark-human hybrid that has incredible stamina, power, and durability. The only downside of Samehada is it has to choose its wielder, because while Samehada is not fighting, it is constantly leeching off the chakra of its wielder. And if Samehada doesn't like your chakra, it will actually produce spikes in the hilt that won't allow you to hold it. And should you be using Samehada to fight somebody with particularly powerful and tasty chakra, Samehada could leave you, like how it left Kisame for Killer Bee. That's the problem with having a sentient sentient weapon. It is sentient, and therefore it's not always gonna agree with you, which is why I believe more in non-sentient weapons, like the next entry on our list, one of the imperial regalia of Japan, the Yadamira. See, on this list, we've already talked about perfect defensive weapons in the Goonbay. And while the Goonbay is incredible at deflecting ninjutsu and making it into wind nature and returning that wind nature at your opponent, the Yadamira takes defense to a whole nother level. You see, the Yadamira is not technically physical like the Goonbay. It is made by Itachi Susanoo. And because the Yadamira technically has no physical form, it is the perfect defense against both physical and ninjutsu attacks. You see, because the Yadamira works by registering whatever chakra release it is hit by and then changing to that chakra release. So let's say hypothetically, once again, you shoot a fireball at Itachi. The Yadamira, once it came into contact with that fireball, would then switch to fire nature and thus nullify the fireball. And this goes for lightning release, water release, fire release, earth release, and physical attacks. But what's truly insane about the Yadamira is that it's connected to a Susanoo, which is also considered technically the perfect defense in the Naruto world. So you have now given something considered the perfect defense another perfect defense, basically saying that any physical attack or ninjutsu attack will be nullified before it even has to hit the second layer of perfect defense. And unlike the Goonbay, this Yadamira is omnidirectional. Itachi can exist within it, which means even if you get behind him and try to use a sneaky little fireball, still gonna get rejected. And we wonder why he had to be killed off. Speaking of being killed off, the next weapons we have are the sacred tools of the Sage of the Six Paths. Now, we talked about these tools briefly in our Tuesday video about Kinkaku and Ginkaku, but in case you haven't seen that, I'll go over them again now. We're gonna talk about these 5 treasured tools in 2 batches, because 4 of the treasured tools are meant to be used together, and then 1 of them is kind of just thrown in. So let's talk about the 4 treasure tools that are meant to be used together. First up, we have the Benishago. You see, the Benishago is able to record a person's word soul when the wielder of the Benishago says the verbal command record. You see, your word soul is the word you say the most. So for me, it would probably be Naruto. Now that your word soul has been recorded, you have to use another treasured tool in order to pull your word soul out of you. And that treasure tool is the Kokinjo. You see, the Kokinjo is the golden canopy rope. It is a bundle of rope wrapped around your arm. The user of the Kokinjo then has to hit the person whose word soul has been sealed with the Benishago with the rope. Once that person has been hit with the rope, their word soul can be pulled out of them. And once you pull out that person's word soul, the word soul can be severed with the Shichi Saiken. And now that your word soul exists within the Benishago, if you ever say the word, for me, which would be Naruto, you get sealed into the Benishago forever. But you can't just stop talking, because if you stop talking for a certain amount of time, your soul also gets sealed in the Benishago. The reason that these weapons are so powerful is because all you basically need to do is point a gourd at somebody, say record, hit them with a rope, and then cut their soul with a blade. And once you've actually captured somebody's word soul within the Benishago, they're all but dead, because the only way that you can escape being sealed in that Benishago is beating who's ever holding these weapons. And considering the fact that these treasured weapons use so much chakra that if an average person tried to use them, it would kill them, who's ever holding these treasured tools is gonna be insanely powerful. So now you have to fight whoever this OP user of these treasured tools is without ever saying your favorite word or stopping talking. And this goes forever. If you run away, the second you stop talking, you're getting sealed in the Benishago. So essentially all the users of these treasure tools have to do is hit you with a rope and then you're dead. But the thing is, the combination of these 3 tools isn't even as strong as the other 2 tools that are treasure tools of the Sage of Six Paths. The Basho Sen, also known as the Banana Palm Fan, allows the user to use all 5 elemental releases. What do I mean by that? Well, essentially by swinging this fan, the user can select one of the 5 basic elemental releases and launch it at their enemy. And this isn't just a little bit of fire or a little lightning or a little wind, a massive amount of this elemental release. Now, of course, this uses so much chakra that Tenten was able to use it once and then she passed out. But once again, we're not talking about Tenten here. The idea of this weapon is truly insane though. As long as you have enough chakra, you now have access to all 5 elemental releases at an incredibly high level. And while obviously this can be countered by things like the Yadamira, and therefore some people will believe that the Yadamira should be higher than this item on the list, the ability to use all 5 elemental releases is something we've only seen in like 10 people max. I kid you not, it's Hiruzen, Sasuke, Sakura, Naruto, Hashirama, Minato, that might be it. Oh, Kakashi. Listen, I know there's gonna be some I missed, okay? Don't go to the comments being like,
Actually, Korotsuchi can use all 5.
but honestly, the Basho Sen pales in comparison to the most powerful of the treasured tools of the Sage of Six Paths, the Kahaku no Johei, also known as the Amber Purifying Pot. This pot is absolutely terrifying. Essentially, if the wielder of this pot calls somebody, like let's say I have this pot and I said, hey, your name. If you respond to me calling you, the pot records your name and then just seals you. So let's just say that Naruto was standing in the Valley of the End and he yelled at Sasuke, Sasuke, like he usually does, and Sasuke responded, Naruto. He would just be sealed forever. Kurama himself stated that the pot was so powerful that anybody sealed within it cannot escape. In fact, if you seal somebody in this pot who's been Edo Tensei'd back to life, if the user of Edo Tensei releases Edo Tensei, they will stay in the pot. Third Raikage was able to use this pot to seal Gyuki. That's the second strongest tailed beast. But since we're talking about sealing people and never letting them get out, the next item on our list is the Sword of Totsuka. My favorite thing to talk about on this page, canonically. You see, the Sword of Totsuka is also a manifested item from Itachi Susanoo, because apparently having the Yadamira wasn't enough. You see, the Sword of Totsuka is a sword of legend. You see, within Japanese lore, the Sword of Totsuka is actually the sword that Susanoo, the god of storms and lightning, used to kill the great snake Orochi. Kinda makes sense now that Itachi used the Sword of Totsuka on his Susanoo to seal Orochimaru. You putting it all together? But what does the Sword of Totsuka do? Well, besides being an absolutely massive sword connected to a Susanoo, should you be pierced by the Sword of Totsuka, you are automatically sealed into a different realm. But what is this realm? You see, this realm is called the World of Drunken Dreams, where essentially you are cast into an entirely new dimension where you are nauseous and dizzy always. Imagine the most blind drunk you've ever been, but for eternity. You know when you get the spins after you lay down? It's that in a dark room forever. And it's not like Itachi needs certain activation situations to happen to stab somebody and seal them. If he stabs you at all with this blade, instantly sealed. And it doesn't matter who you are. So if you give Itachi a big target like a giant snake or a tailed beast or anything like that, he can stab it easily and then bye-bye. It is quite literally the perfect offensive weapon. And since it hypothetically seals your soul, you shouldn't be able to escape, which is why Orochimaru technically shouldn't be alive right now. And it's why I'm actually now creating the theory that it's a possibility that the Orochimaru we see in today's Naruto and in the war arc is actually a different Orochimaru than we used to have, because his soul was sealed in the World of Drunken Dreams and nothing was ever done to release him from that. And yet the DNA and chakra used from Sasuke made a new kind of Orochimaru, and that was the Orochimaru who wanted to help the village because that's what Sasuke essentially released him wanting to do. I'm gonna make a video about that. But let's get back on track here. While the Sword of Totsuka is incredibly powerful, it can only seal one person at a time. However, there was a weapon made in Naruto the Last that can wipe entire planets off the face of the earth. Yes, you heard me correctly. You see, the Hidden Cloud during an era of peace decided to make a thing called the Chakra Cannon. Why did they do that? Well, because the Hidden Cloud has been notoriously underhanded for the entire history of Naruto. So they decided that a time of peace would be the best time to get all their scientists together to create a quite literal planet buster. But Chakra Cannon is kind of a misnomer for this, because Chakra Cannon actually enveloped 3 different cannons. You see, the cannon made during Naruto the Last is the Chakra Diffusion Cannon. This cannon is charged by groups of shinobi putting all of their chakra into it. And once the cannon is charged with all of this chakra from shinobis from the Hidden Cloud, it fires a twin muzzle blue laser beam. A twin muzzle blue laser beam that was able to destroy the moon, which was being thrown at the earth by Toneri Otsutsuki. Yes, you heard me right. This cannon destroyed the moon. However, the Chakra Cannon had 3 muzzles. And this is because the top muzzle, the one not utilized by the double blue beam bottom muzzles, was the Chakra Transportation Cannon, and was technically more powerful than the Chakra Diffusion Cannon. You see, while the Chakra Diffusion Cannon was used to destroy meteorites that were falling from the moon, Chakra Transportation Cannon could be used to destroy the entire moon. But why is this cannon more powerful than the Chakra Diffusion Cannon? Because this cannon can use chakra to teleport things to an entirely different dimension. So it's not so much that the moon would be destroyed, it would simply just be shifted to another plane of existence. And then this technology has been co-opted and used in Boruto by the Funatu clan, who have made a lesser chakra cannon to attack ships. And this is referred to as the scientific ninja tool Chakra Cannon. But what's stronger than a weapon that's able to destroy planets? Well, how about a weapon that's able to both destroy planets and create them? Yes, the last entry on this list is the Sword of Nunabuko. You see, this sword was originally wielded by Hagoromo Otsutsuki, the Sage of Six Paths. And according to Obito, this sword was a holy relic wielded by Hagoromo Otsutsuki and used to create the entire Earth. Essentially, it's implied by Obito that the Sword of Nunabuko was used to shape the modern world that we see now, which means that more likely than not, it was used to create mountains, carve out oceans, and then give chakra in the form of ninshu to the entire world. Considering the fact that the Sword of Nunabuko is based off the heavenly jeweled spear, which was used by Izanagi in Izanami to create the first land on Earth in Shinto lore, that says something about its power. Obito went on to say that this weapon could just as easily destroy the entire world as it created it. But fortunately for us, it was partially destroyed by Sasuke's Susanoo blade, which was enhanced with Kurama's and Senjutsu chakra. And that's it. Every single mythical weapon in Naruto ranked and explained. There was a lot more than I thought there was going to be, but we made it to the end. If you guys liked this list and this ranking, please tell me in the comments below. If you guys think that I misplaced any of these items, please don't tell me in the comments below. And while you guys are down there, make sure you like the video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. Listen, I'm not saying that half of the swords in Naruto are just so far from swords, but the Sword of Nunabuko is quite literally a double helix.